Today we have the pleasure of being joined by Helena Traill from nooh. She's going to talk to us all about her book along with what she's doing.
And I run a design agency in London called nooh Studio. I'm here today to talk about a community I built called 100 Stories. The project started, I think, about 4 years ago when I was studying graphic design and had to put together a final project over 6 months. They said, if it's personal, it's better. So I went really personal. My dad's had cancer, he's had brain tumours for over 20 years. I decided to look at cancer and collect stories of people affected by it.
That's wonderful. So how did that evolve from being, you're going to give me stories and we're going to publish them, to being something slightly more inclusive and rotary?
The beginning of it was literally just an open call to action of, would you share your story? And people were super open with their stories and responded to my emails. And as I just got more of them, which was quite surprising, I kind of was like, I have to put them in a bit more of a formal output, I guess.
In your experience of working with charities and communities, what would be your number one tip for growth?
So I had to think about this and thought I'd come up with a clever answer, but then actually I've got a really simple one, and it's literally Twitter. I was amazed at how useful Twitter is.
And that was just you just posting and it just using the right hashtags, or it just kind of picking up momentum itself?
And the retweeting of different people with kind of big followings and things like that.
Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing? Hello and welcome to the Digital Community Managers podcast, where we chat with community managers, champions and founders about their experience leading and supporting digital communities. My name's Pete Heslop and I lead the team here at Steadfast Collective, and we exist to craft digital applications that bring people together. We've created the Digital Community Podcast to be a bite-sized look into what it takes to start, grow, and scale digital communities. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Helena Traill from nooh, and she's going to talk to us all about her book along with what she's doing. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got into what you're doing?
Thank you very much for having me, Pete. So my name's Helena Traill and I run a design agency in London called nooh Studio. But I'm here today to talk about a community I built called 100 Stories, originally the cancer chapter. The project started, I think, about 4 years ago when I was studying graphic design at Central St Martin's and had to put together a final project over 6 months. And they said, if it's personal, it's better. So I went really personal. And my dad's had cancer, he's had brain tumours for over 20 years. And I decided to look at cancer and collect stories of people affected by it. So I put a tweet out, started asking people to come and chat to me. And I closed my laptop for my birthday weekend and opened it to, I think it was over 60 emails and questions, and I'll be in it, I'll be part of your book, which was amazing. And it kind of grew from there. So I spoke to 250 people across a few months, collated a stack of prints and collated 100 people's stories, hence the name. And then post graduation went and actually crowdfunded it as a book, which was the book it became, then a podcast, then a blog, and then kind of social media and all that jazz. So it became a nice little community, lots of friends, and met lots of people along the way.
So would it be fair to say the project started out as like a call for research, almost like you were trying to gather stories for your project, and that evolved into a community? Just take us on that process of how did that evolve from being, you're going to give me stories and we're going to publish them, to being something slightly more inclusive and kind of rotary?
Yeah, good question. I guess the beginning of it was literally just an open call to action of, would you share your story and be part of this project? And people were super open with their stories and responded to my emails and had kind of phone interviews and interviews like this. And then as I just got more of them, which was quite surprising, I kind of was like, I have to put them in a bit more of a formal output, I guess. And I presented my first 100 stories at my degree show and invited everyone in it to come along. And
Wow.
about 30,
Okay.
40 people showed up and just said, look, I want I want to be able to read them, not just as this book. And so that's when it started to become, okay, how can we publish this?
Mm,
And I decided not to put them online as a blog, like in a whole series, because I thought that there's something really nice in being able to physically hold them. It's more personal. So that's
yeah,
why we did the crowdfunder.
that's wonderful. And obviously you went on to start the podcast. How did that kind of
Yeah.
how did that come about, and how did that go?
They were really fun. So those are in lockdown. Again, it's
Mm,
just like a continuation where after the book was published, people kept getting in touch because I kept the social media going, saying, "Can
mm,
I be in it?" And I was like, "Oh, now do I have to do like a 101 to 200?" So thought I'd take another like spin on the storytelling and started the podcast. And then I spoke to people all around the world.
okay, nice. And then in your quote unquote day job, you run a design studio. Why don't you tell us just a little bit more about that and kind of the sort of people you work with?
Yeah, so we're trying to work with community led or healthcare, kind of health and well-being clients. So we do branding and design. My favorite clients, probably shouldn't say that, but are small charities that are mainly in the healthcare space, and really
Mm,
enjoy working with them to either rebrand, create assets. And my kind of main interest personally as a creative is definitely storytelling. So the book,
mm.
podcast, whatever it is. And so I try to bring kind of creative campaigns to whatever we do, whether it's a film or a brand or whoever it's for.
Nice. I love that storytelling aspect.
Thanks.
Been chatting to a lot of community managers recently, and they talk a lot about how a lot of their job is storytelling, is extracting good
Yeah.
stories from people in a really natural way, and then almost packaging them up, giving them over to a marketing team, and letting them go wild with them. But it's a case of how can we work with people, yeah, and it just like a supernatural conversation to get these great stories out of people.
Mm.
And there's a real art in that.
Yeah, so there's a knack to it. And my favorite job title is definitely head of storytelling. So Maggie's, the charity, has, I did my launch party in one of their spaces in London, and their head of storytelling wrote the introduction to the book. And I just think that's so
Hmm.
cool. Like her job was to go out and speak to people, collect stories, and share them.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful story title, a wonderful job title. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice. Okay, so we've got our standard questions, and we'll jump straight in. So, in your experience of working with charities and communities, and obviously through your own experiences, what would be your kind of number one tip for fostering growth and progression in those communities?
So I had to think about this and thought I'd come up with a clever answer, but then actually I've got a really kind of simple one, and it's
Right?
literally Twitter. Um,
Okay.
I was I was like amazed at how useful Twitter is within the charity, the healthcare, mental health, all of that space. I think that was proven by putting a call out on there. All of the 250 people I spoke to mainly came from tweets.
Mhm. That's wild. Okay, so that was just you, and that was just you just posting, and it just kind of picking using the right hashtags, or it just kind of picking up momentum itself.
Yeah, and the retweeting of different people with kind of big followings and things like that.
Okay, fab. And how did you organize it? Was it just a case of just trying to use all the DMs that kind of came in and whatnot, and just trying to come some sort of process and order to get these stories in?
So I would have done it better. So if I'm going to try and start doing it again, and I literally had spreadsheets coming out of my ears. So next time, I think some kind of online form,
Mm,
and kind of yeah, a bit more organized next time, because it is, if someone might contact and say, oh, I want to send this on to a friend, or can we do it on the phone, and then spend
mm,
hours on the phone and hours going through emails.
mm. And when you're working with your clients in the agency, what
Mm.
do you have advice for them when they're trying to push things forward in terms of maybe a campaign or something? Do you have like a go to that you'll maybe recommend first?
So in terms of a process or like an outcome or
Well, I mean, in terms of, so let's say it was the charity, and they're looking to grow maybe in terms of sponsorships or that kind of thing. Do you have like a couple of first
mm.
port of calls that you try first to see if you can, in terms of like delivery things you could deliver?
Yeah, so my favorite is animation or little film. So I think
Okay.
a lot of charities, especially small ones, are very good at telling their story, but with a 10, 20-minute conversation or with a
Mm.
entire website. Whereas can you grab someone's attention within 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and send like a campaign video? So that's kind of the angle of storytelling I'm trying to push.
Yeah. And the animation's really interesting as well, because if you're working in the space of like medical and healthcare, it can be difficult to walk into a hospital with a big camera and whatnot, and to get that kind of video footage, right? But you can do a lot with animation that doesn't require actors or real people to have to be kind of intruded on their privacy.
Yeah, well, my favorite is both. We just putting the two together. So we just shot a campaign for one of the NHS trusts, and it was a few actors, well, actually real life people, and a guy who works for the ambulance, and a nurse, and we filmed that. And then because they weren't actors, they read their script, and then over the top to highlight the story, we did some animation, and the two
That's
worked
fun.
together really nicely.
That's fun. That's a really nice way of storytelling. Again, it's just storytelling, just in another medium, right? So
Yeah.
nice. Okay, so in terms of engagement, obviously we've talked on Twitter being a really great tool for you growing and kind of gaining these stories. In terms of keeping folk engaged, what were you doing? What was your kind of
Mm.
go-to methods of keeping your community engaged?
So I think it was actually that the storytelling, but in a creative way. So changing it up quite a lot. So whether it
Mm,
was me explaining why I'm doing it and how I'm doing it. For example, when I launched the Kickstarter, I did a piece to camera explaining why with a bit of animation, and that was quite engaging. And then also providing value. So as we got further down the line and kind of gain
mm,
momentum, I'd get other people to write blog posts, kind of input their opinion into it. And share things in that way. So it's all I think about different ways of doing it, moving it around a bit, different mediums, and
mm.
then as much value as possible, like any content these days.
Yeah, for sure. So after some momentum picked up, did you say you had other people kind of doing some of the kind of content themselves? Is that what you were explaining?
Yeah, so I had some people from the book then, saying, "Oh, I could write more, I could explain more," and so they'd then feed in a blog post, and it was basically a platform for them to share their stories, and that's what I found extremely valuable within, especially the cancer space, is that
Mm,
people. I thought, oh, no one's going to want to tell me, what they've been through and et cetera, et cetera. But actually, people were super open to it, and it really, a lot of them found it cathartic
mm,
and useful. And then reading other people's stories that really helped them. It helped me, even helped my dad. He never liked talking
mm.
about it, but he ended up writing a bit for the book, which was, I was like, whoa, that was very unexpected. So
Okay.
kind of that layering of the storytelling and different people inputting, really valuable.
Yeah. And obviously, when you have that kind of momentum, that flywheel of other people getting involved, not only are they practically helping kind of move things forward, but obviously they become bigger advocates for the mission, right?
Yeah,
If they're involved at a larger level, they take more ownership and they want to tell more people about it, and they become large advocates. And creating that momentum is a big thing. And I'm sure you know this through kind of agency world, but your best customers almost become like your fans, and they're the ones that refer you
yeah.
other folk to work with you. And it's when we can build that kind of momentum is when things really pick up steam in community and in agency world.
Yeah, and then it pays off. So, for example, I've it's kind of gone a bit quiet. 100 stories probably the last 2 years, and I said looking to pick it up again. But I get an inquiry every few weeks of people saying, "Oh, when you do the podcast again, can I be involved?" And I haven't
Mm,
put a call out at all. And so I think the effort doesn't just help now; it helps into the future as well.
yeah, 100%. Okay, so from your time in doing 100 stories, what was the biggest challenge? It was obviously quite an emotional, quite a personal story to tell. What was the biggest challenge you
Mm.
faced during that time?
Yeah, definitely the mental health side. So collecting yeah, over 200 stories of people affected by pretty harsh illness. And that's pretty close to home for me
Mm,
and quite a lot of other people. So, getting those, and I kind of liken it to, I guess, a therapist in which you don't become immune to it, but you start to become used to like reading those stories. And actually, having done that, it's really helped me now. Like my dad's kind of coming towards the end of his life, and my sister's finding it very difficult to deal with. But I've spoken to so many people within that space that actually I'm
Mhm.
a little bit, I guess, a little bit stronger because I've
Mm.
gone through that whole process. And yeah,
That's tough. There, I mean, there's a reason why therapists have to have their own therapists. And
yeah,
we did a hackathon, and it was for charities, and we had a brief from Shelter, and their brief was the people who are picking up the phone are struggling with such mental health
mm,
disasters in their lives because they are constantly just hearing the worst news, and it's exhausting, just like completely exhausting and draining. And these people who are
mm,
essentially just taking phone calls are just finishing their day just empty. Um, and yeah, we tried to work with them on a project and whatnot, but yeah, I can't imagine how that's a lot of mental load, isn't it, to take on it at one time.
mm. Yeah, and I think it's, if you see the campaign at the end, so I also made an animation that went with the book at the time. And the final
Mm,
animation isn't the whole conversation or the whole kind of heavy hitting conversation. I think that's also what people say when get, oh, I made a book with 100 stories of people affected by cancer, and they go, why do I want to read that? That sounds really depressing. But actually, when you see the final product, it is very uplifting, and people have
mm,
found like great use of it. And I hear of stories of the book being passed around saying, oh, I handed it on to a friend now, and things like that are
mm.
really nice. But no, you're right. I think that like it's the amount of story. So I think, if someone's going to go out and be doing this within the health space, mental health, then how you spread it out. So, do you limit the amount of, so I started limiting the amount of emails I'd read each time. So
Okay.
the first time I read like loads at a time. And then
Yeah.
the next day I was like, right, I'm just going to read two, and then I'll
Mm,
wait to the next day. And that helped.
yeah. And I imagine in a really kind of bizarre comparison is we work with quite a lot of really niche communities. So, for instance, cross stitch, or we do a lot of work in the caravan community. Um, People who use leisure vehicles for holidays and whatnot, and people who are in niche communities or kind of niche groups are so passionate, but also well informed about their subject matter. So I can imagine the emails you're
Yeah.
receiving aren't 200 words; they're detailed accounts of what happened because these people are well researched, well educated, and almost passionate
Mm.
about the subject because they have to be because it's affecting them or someone they love so much.
Yeah. Yeah, so the book actually was ordered in the amount of words. So number one was my dad, because he didn't talk about his illness, and then all the way through to, I think it was like a 3,000 word essay. And then each story in the book is paired with a portrait, and depending on how much they spoke, depends on how distorted the image is. So the last one you can see the person's face, and the first one you can't. But yeah, there were some long hefty ones in there, and they were edited a
Yeah.
bit.
You use almost like a dot matrix sort of style, don't you, on the pictures? It's really effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
So the pixel that I almost used, I coded a thing and put the images in, and it came out with this pixelated, almost like screen print
Hmm,
image. Is based on, as you said, a little matrix thing, which was designed for the Cancer on Board badges. And now I'm
okay.
actually a trustee of that charity. So it's nice how they helped me with my book, and now I'm helping them.
That's a wonderful loop. Um, Looking forward to the next 12 months. What does the next 12 months look
Yeah.
like for you at the studio, but also maybe for 100 stories? Because you can still buy the book today. But what does the next 12 months look like for you
Yeah.
guys?
Got some left. So starting with the studio, I'm trying to kind of niche into health and well-being, and so take my learning and my
Mm,
learning of storytelling and mental health and everything from 100 stories and other clients, and really kind of push into that space. And I don't just want to do design and branding. I want to really look at storytelling and campaigns, and how you can take
mm,
stories for a charity. Like we said, make an animation, make a video, and what's the framework around that, not just create a few social assets, but how do you engage and get that best story and showcase it across all different kinds of media? So that's that's the studio. Lots to work on, lots to do as always with a small business.
Mm.
And then 100 stories. So over the next 12 months, I'm finishing a master's in healthcare design, and that comes off the back of the book and my interest there. And so I'm doing a research project, which is got to read my question because how to tell stories which resonate with patients having ongoing treatment. So the master's is a lot around storytelling, and I'm going to kind of resurrect 100 stories and speak to that group of people and the engaged list of people that have contacted me since asking to be on the podcast again. I'm going to look to start it all up again, hopefully.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us today and telling your story and the 100 story. Um, if people want to find out more about what you're up to or the project, where's the best place for them to find it online?
If you find me, Helena Traill, on LinkedIn, we love LinkedIn.
Wonderful. I'll link it in the show notes as well. But I really appreciate you being a guest today,
Thank you,
taking the
Pete.
time to chat. And yeah, we'll be back next time with another person championing community and sharing their kind of insights. But I appreciate your time today and all the best with the project.